Welcome to Everyone Loves Guitar, where we get to sit down and talk with interesting professional guitar players and related music industry experts. If you love playing guitar, stick around. You're in the right place. Hey everybody, welcome to Everyone Loves Guitar podcast. I've got a great interview here today. With us is Walter Carter from Carter Vintage Guitars in Nashville. If you've never been to the store, go. I was there last year. It is literally probably the nicest guitar shop I've ever been in. Not only did they have just like a great selection, but everybody there was so warm and nice. It was almost unbelievable. It was like, you know, I asked people questions here and there, and they almost bent over backwards just to answer questions that had nothing to do with anything in the shop. Just a great place. Walter Carter and his wife, Christie, they started Carter Vintage Guitars in Nashville in 2012, but they both have a very long history and career in guitars. Christie spent 25 years in the vintage guitar business selling high-end guitars. Walter is the author of a dozen books on vintage guitars and guitar companies with 25 years experience buying and selling vintage fretted instruments, including actually 10 years as Gibson's in-house historian and 12 years at another vintage dealer. He's written a dozen books on vintage guitars and guitar companies, from Gibson, 100 Years of an American Icon, the Gibson Electric Guitar Book, a biography of the Oak Ridge Boys, and a 40-pound coffee table book called The Guitar Collection, which is now a collector's item and sells for over $1,000 on Amazon. Carter Vintage has a staff of over 20 people, housed in over 8,000 square feet. And on their website, it says customers are welcome to try out instruments on comfortable benches or in private rooms. And again, I can tell you from personal experience, truer words were never spoken. Walter, I really appreciate your time, and thanks for coming on the podcast.
Oh, my pleasure. Glad to be here.
So let's go back a little bit. Where are you originally from, and where'd you grow up?
Well, I was born in Atlanta and grew up until I was 10 in Decatur, Alabama. Then my family moved to North Carolina, to Chapel Hill. And so I really grew up there. And then after high school, I stayed there and went to UNC, and then came to Nashville straight out of college in 1971.
What did you do? What made you go to Nashville out of college?
Well, I wanted to be a songwriter. Actually, the last summer I was in Chapel Hill, I needed a couple of courses to graduate. And I just decided at the end of the summer that whichever part of writing that I felt more comfortable about, that would determine where I moved. And if it was going to be fiction, I was going to go to New York. And if it was going to be screenplays, and I actually had a degree in radio, TV, and film, I would go to L.A. And if it was songs, I would go to Nashville. And by the end of the summer, I had a pocketbook full of songs, and so that was it. And I had a friend here also, so that I could crash with. So I came straight to Nashville.
That's a pretty, as you look back, that's a pretty ambitious undertaking for a young kid coming out of college. Where did you get either the confidence or the support to even have that thought process that I'm going to go to New York? I mean, you're coming from Atlanta, Alabama, and North Carolina, and then you're wanting to go to New York or L.A., completely different. You know, that's where'd you get that mindset from?
Well, I figured that's just where you had to go. If I was any good as a writer in whatever field, and I thought I was pretty good and at least had potential to be good, so that's where you got to go. And if it's songs, I guess you could go to New York or L.A. also. But Nashville, I was more interested at that time in the music that I at least thought was coming out of Nashville. Country rock, and of course, coming from Chapel Hill, James Taylor was a big influence.
Sure.
He was just a year or two ahead of me in school, all the way through there, and so Nashville just seemed like the right place. It wasn't too far. My parents had moved back to Atlanta by that time, so it wasn't too far from home if something went terribly wrong. But I was able to get a job at a restaurant here shortly after I got here, and I crashed with a friend in his dorm room at Vanderbilt, and I felt pretty well established after a week or two.
That's awesome. It's good. It's funny how, when you're younger, you need a lot less reasons to do something and to feel certain ways. When you're older, you tend to sort of overthink things a little bit.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I had $85 when I moved here. I figured that would last me a month or so. Yeah. And then waiting tables and bartending, I always had cash. So really, financially, I was great. Probably the best off I've ever been.
So you come to Nashville, a pocket full of songs and a dream.
Yeah.
And what's next? You're waiting tables. What are you doing to hustle the music gig, the music end of life, and what's going on there, and how's that happening?
Well, I pushed. I wrote songs, and at first I was working days. So on my days off, I went around to publishers, and then I switched to nights, so I would have days free. And there were a lot of guys in town doing the same thing who had just come here. It was a hotbed for new songwriters. Everybody wanted to be the next Christopherson. There was a club called the Exit Inn that had just opened that started a thing called Writers Night, and there was a real vibrant sort of underground songwriter community at that time, and as always, there were people in the more established end of the music business who were trying to widen the scope of music in Nashville, and I felt like there was a lot of opportunity, and I changed directions after a while, but at least it was at first it was it seemed to be a land of opportunity for me. So
how did you start getting involved with guitars? Were you a guitar player this whole time? A James Taylor like a?
Yeah. Fingerstyle, no picks. Yeah, pretty much heavily influenced by James Taylor. I played other instruments. I picked up horns and I played trumpet and sax and I could play bass and piano some. So actually, I never made a dime playing guitar in Nashville, but I've made some money or played a session at least on all of those other instruments.
That's great.
In the time that I've been here. But you're an idiot if you come to Nashville as a guitar player, and unless you're really good. I mean, the line from Nashville Cats, 1,352 guitar players, and you can probably multiply that by 10, and they're all better than me. And even though I'm still better than some of them, but there are many really, really great guitar players in this town. So that's usually not now that may be the toughest competitive area of coming here for any kind of musician, or I would guess it's probably even tougher than songwriting if you're not right at the top when you come in.
It's probably like trying to become a professional baseball player or something like that.
Exactly. Well, yeah, at the top of any profession that takes skill or artistic talent, it's really you've got to have the talent, and you've got to have sort of make your own opportunities and have a little bit of luck, and then be able to capitalize on opportunities when they open up. So that's what I was writing songs and knocking on doors and just playing anywhere I got a chance to play and trying to make contacts. That's the way it's done.
So what was the path that started you into a career more related to guitars, and how did that develop and expand?
Well, it started I have this problem with focusing and wanting to do too many things.
That's called entrepreneurial ADD. I think a lot of us suffer from that.
I guess. Well, it's like instead of want to write songs. I wanted to write film scripts, and I wanted to write fiction also. So I was just walking along a street one day and ran into a guy who had started a little street magazine called Hank, and it was just sort of a local music, an underground magazine before there really were such things.
Sure.
And I knew him from bartending. He was actually a DJ, an FM radio DJ back when that was super hip.
I know you have to qualify all of this.
Yeah. and I just, of course, I said, well, he asked me what I thought about the last issue. I said, well, I didn't think, some of the writing wasn't so good in it. And Another fault is kind of I have his bluntness.
That's awesome, man.
And he said, well, why don't you write something? And well, sure, of course. I'm sure I can do it. And I guess I had written a few things for the school paper in high school, but just assumed that I could write. And I went and I grabbed Steve Young, the guy who wrote Seven Bridges Road, and interviewed him. And they published it in that magazine. And then I wrote a little record review and one other thing. I think it was an article on a band that who were friends of mine, and it had landed an audition in town. Clive Davis had sent some guys down to check them out, and they didn't get signed. But I wrote up a little story. So I had those three things. In the meantime, I'm songwriting again, and I'd gotten married, and there was a little pressure to get a real job.
What year was this?
This was around 77, 78.
Okay.
And just to sort of ease the pressure, I applied for a job at the local newspaper, and I had my entire portfolio for journalism was awesome. Those three things. And then to my shock, I got the job, and I thought I was making some headway in the music business, but who knows what would have happened if I maintained the focus on music. But then I got a job covering music at the Tennessean, the morning paper here in Nashville.
Okay.
So then I'm a journalist, and we're still not two guitars yet, as we know me today.
Right.
At one point, I left the paper. This was about '82.
You left the Tennessean.
Yeah,
okay.
And by this time, I was divorced also.
Okay. I was going to ask you if that was like what number marriage. I said, I was just talking to this guy. I just met him. Let me shut up.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was one of two, and the second one's still going on. So we'll get to that pretty soon.
Hey, we're on the same page. That's great.
Yeah. So, I left the Tennessee and went back to songwriting. I hooked up with a publishing company that was owned by the Oak Ridge Boys, who I'd gotten my first song cut by them back when they were in gospel. And at this time, they were moving out of gospel into country, and had established themselves as a country act. So I got back on with them, but still kept up some freelance work because the pay as a songwriter with a weekly advance wasn't very much. And so I did as much freelance work as I could find, still in journalism, mostly music business stuff. And at one point, and then I got married again, or at least hooked up with Christie, who's my wife now.
Well, what year was this?
It was 85 or so, somewhere 87.
Okay.
We got, let's see. Boy, I was afraid you were going to ask that. I think we got married in 87.
Wait a minute. So you've been married 30 years? Is my
yes.
Right? That's awesome, man. Congratulations.
Yeah. It seems like I could figure it out quicker, couldn't I?
Hey, I've been with my wife 25, and I go through the same, carry the one, and
Yeah, we're at a round number now.
Yeah.
So, so it's mid 80s, and around the end of 80s, I guess I was just freelancing mostly. Not much happening with songs that I knew something big was about to happen, but we didn't have much money. I worked 2 semesters at Middle Tennessee State University teaching music business programs. They're in Murfreesboro, which is about 35 miles down the road.
That's a music college, isn't it?
They do have a music business program there. Yeah.
Okay.
And Belmont does too, but
Sure.
which is better known now. But at that time, MTSU was, I think, it was certainly a bigger program, if not better known. But so I taught there, and I heard through a friend of mine who actually I had known back in North Carolina, and who was in the band that I had covered for this audition for Arista, and who replaced me at the Tennessean in this small world. At that time, Fret's magazine, which covered acoustic instruments, was about to go out of business, and a local vintage guitar dealer, George Gruen, was wanting to start his own magazine and try to fill that gap, and he needed somebody to edit. And he had asked this friend of mine who declined, but told me about it. So I went down, and again, as I'd done with the first articles for Hank magazine, just represented myself as somebody who knew how to edit a magazine, and so I got hired. We had a couple of other. The magazine never came to fruition, but the research that was started then led to 3 books that I did with George Gruen. One was Gruen's Guide to Vintage Guitars, which is a comprehensive field guide and identification guide for vintage guitars. And then the other 2 were coffee table books that covered electrics and acoustics. So now we're finally into guitars and guitar writing and guitar history. But up until that time, I really, I knew what a Martin D28 was and the difference between a D18 and a D28. I knew the difference between a Strat and a Tele, and that was about it. I actually played a Guild guitar, a D40, and really had not too much further interest in vintage. And I was just thrown from the frying pan into the fire when I started working for Gruen, and then that, the rest of it is the great success story, I guess.
So this was around 1990-ish?
Yes. Okay,
and you started, and so then you got hooked up with Gruen, and what were you doing with him? You just started working at the shop, or
no?
It sounds like you're more of a.
I was hired to do this magazine that never happened. So
right.
I immediately started researching on instruments and supervising the photography of instruments, and later actually doing the photography. And doing I did some interviews with some dealers that we never used because we didn't have the magazine. But basically just started doing research on old guitars and guitar company history, and there was a lot to uncover at that time. There were only maybe 5 books that were out on vintage guitars, American guitars. Tom Wheeler's great work was out of print. Mike Longworth had his Martin book, I think maybe in a second edition by that time. Richard Smith had done his Rickenbacker book, and Andre Duchessoir had done a little paperback thing called Guitar Identification it was just an enormous amount of information on the 4 major brands, Gibson, Martin, Fender, and Gretsch. And that was it. So the entire guitar bookshelf at that time was about 6 inches. And
that's amazing. That in 1990 there's 5 books on vintage guitars. That's really weird. So how did you go? Okay, so you're doing all this research on vintage guitars. Take me to the point where how that led now to you being involved in now buying and selling guitars, and then opening Carter.
Okay, it's still a roundabout story, and I must add that the big thing that was going to happen was that I actually did have a hit song during that period.
Wow!
Kathy Mattea cut a song of mine around '89 or so called "Life as We Knew It," that I had co-written with a guy named Fred Kohler, and it was a country hit, and helped us get into a new house. But I was involved in other things by that time, to the point where I wasn't really able to try to beat the bushes and follow up on it the way I would have if I didn't have another job. So now back to guitar stuff. I went to from Gruen's in '93. I went to Gibson. Again, they were looking for somebody for a writing job, and in this case, it was to write a book on the 100th anniversary of Gibson, which was coming up in 1994. So I signed on there and did that, and then the Epiphone people at Gibson wanted their own book, so I did a book on Epi, and just began functioning as more of an in-house copywriter for ad, and especially anything that had to do with history, and also a kind of adjunct guy for the customer service department if they didn't know the answer to questions. And at some point, the fledgling internet group got put under me. So I just sort of took things in stride as opportunities arose there, just anything I could do to help the company. And I was there about 5 years, and then wanted to go back again to writing songs. And so did that again for about 3 years. And at that point, co-wrote a novel with Fred Kohler, the guy I'd written the song with, which remains unpublished. But
why?
I don't know. Just that's a good question. And
man, I hope you lose sleep over that question tonight now, because you need to get that thing out, man.
Yeah,
it's written.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and it's called Dead Strings. It's really good.
And,
but
come on, man.
Yeah. well, okay, I'll send you a copy.
Yeah.
As soon as we're done.
You know what? This it makes sense that you became a copywriter for them, because the whole key to writing good copy, as you know, is in the research.
Yes.
When you have all the research done, you don't have to kill yourself to write. It just comes out. Right. So that makes a ton of sense. So, okay, so you went back to writing songs.
Yeah.
You have an unpublished novel.
Yeah. So, and then I went back to Gibson for another 5 years or so.
To take over the internet aspect again, or?
At times, both the internet and at times I was the acting creative director when there wasn't one, so that the graphic artists reported to me at some times. And I was just, my title was editorial director, and I was just sort of lord over the written word at Gibson, and then still had this historian. In terms of work, that would be last on the priority list, the historian stuff. But that's how most people knew me.
So let me interrupt you 1 second. So this is in the early to mid 2000s now.
Yeah. Well, you're keeping good track of this.
Oh yeah, I'm writing this down. I'm interested in your story. I always find the story really interesting that's what I learn. Okay, so what is your relationship this whole time with guitars, as far as your enthusiasm? I mean, it's almost like you working in a bakery and you never touch the cupcakes.
Yeah. Well, I was buying quite a bit by this time. I wasn't selling or dealing. And my wife came to work at Gruen's right within a year after I started there.
Okay.
And which would have been in 1988. And I think the first thing I bought was a 53 Martin 0017, which I still use a lot, and it's just a wonderful little guitar. And
so you said you were buying. You mean for yourself? You started.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So you got the bug, and you.
I would buy a few things as they would come in, and I had a little weakness for lap steels for quite a while.
So wait. If you said you're buying a few things, if I asked your wife, define few things, would she agree that few things is accurate?
Yeah.
Oh, she would. Few?
Yeah,
oh, okay. Usually when the guy says buying a few things, he's got like 100 guitars.
Well, at one point I probably had 40 or 50 lap steels, and I decided to clean out the closet, and I took maybe 20 of them in to Gruen's, thinking I was going to sell them, but then I traded them all for a D'Angelico guitar.
Oh wow!
So still, the net value would have been the same, but the space would have been condensed a little bit. No, she would be supportive because she had the buying bug worse than I did.
Oh man, that's dangerous. Both husband and wife and a couple buying gear.
Yeah, I was having to put the brakes on her. Her office has a wall of Sunburst pre-war Martins with Sunburst finishes.
Wow.
That's what she likes. I was piddling around with $400 lap steels, and then she was, every time I'd buy a lap steel, she'd buy a Martin.
Wow.
Except on one occasion when she bought a car. But
which saved you money instead of buying a Martin.
Well, yeah, it was about the same. So I'm into the all through this, from the early '90s. I'm certainly into this as sort of a collector and a player collector standpoint, but not really dealing. And my second round at Gibson was from about 2001 to 2005. And then I had the opportunity to take a pretty high-end management job at Grail. So I went back there, and Christie was still there. By that time, she was pretty much the operations manager. And I kind of headed up everything else. And that lasted, I guess, about 7 years. And in 2012, we just decided to go on our own. I think, as in any job, you always think you can do a better job than the guy who you're reporting to.
Sure.
So that, and just it was time. I mean, she's somewhat younger than me and had already put in 25 years there. So
sure.
She felt it was time. So we just happened to have discovered a building for sale, and where we could put down a deposit on it that was fully refundable for any reason. And
oh, wow.
We just thought it would be a good building to invest in, regardless of. This was really before we were had really committed to going out on our own. But at the end of the year, by October 2012, we were on our own. We had the building under contract, so we went on through with that. We had a friendly banker who helped. A friendly banker.
Man, I don't ever heard one of those.
Yeah.
I've heard rumors about friendly bankers, but I've never actually met one.
Well, he'd seen what Christie had done at Gruen's and how she handled things there. So, he was had full belief in her, and
that's great.
And helped us get going. So we renovated the building and opened the doors. And there were some days when there were only a couple of people who came in. There was never a day when we had no customers at all. But we started with 75 instruments. We're up to like 1,600 now. So it's grown pretty fast. So
that's the same building you're in now. That's the original.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a beautiful, great location, man. I loved everything about your store, man. It was so, for some reason, some guitar shops you go into and people have a level of it's almost arrogance. It's kind of weird. Like, I got this guitar, you don't, which I never get, because the cash is trying to flow out of my pocket into theirs, or customers. And, so, but you guys it was just a great, it was a wonderful experience. So I'm happy that you're doing great.
Well, we had worked in a store that had a reputation for sometimes not being so friendly, and I think every kid who ever came up and visiting guitar stores at some point or another got the cold shoulder from management and was made to feel less than welcome.
Yes.
And it was a point. There was nothing we could say much in our business plan that wasn't in any retail business, except we made it a prominent bullet point of what we're trying to do, and that was be nice to people and provide a comfortable, friendly place where people would feel at home playing guitars. And so we were that way by design, I think, as well as our natural personalities and the people we hire. But that was certainly a conscious thing that we were trying to do.
Well, it shows. That's all I could tell you. I'm honestly, and I'm not a guy that, you don't know me from anywhere, but I'm the last guy that would ever. I'm like you said, you're blunt to a fault. I'm the same way. No, it's a blessing and a curse to be like that, but I'm okay with that. But you've done it deliberately, and it shows, because it was great. Yeah. So,
what I like to tell people is we started the business in our living room, and then we just brought the living room to our business.
And that's great, and it shows. Let me ask you. Let's talk about some mistakes. Mistakes, guitar players. So guys come into your shop all day long, and they're asking the wrong questions, I'm sure. What are some of the biggest mistakes that a guitar player makes when he's choosing a guitar?
Well, I think he's just got to find the one that works for him. I think maybe some people overthink what they're trying to get out of a guitar. You know, if it feels right, it probably is. And there's, you know, I don't know. Everybody is so different, and they need different guitars. So it's hard to say that that any one guitar is inherently better for someone than another until they sit down and start playing. I think they can put a little too much importance on the brand name, and if they're thinking about resale value, that's the wrong thing to think about. But if they're thinking about that, then the brand name is important. But resale value is not going to help your playing any. So
I think that's an extremely valid point, because I'll tell you myself, and I'm not a professional guitar player, far from it. I'm just a hobbyist, but I love playing guitar. I play every day, and I always want to get better. I am so reluctant to buy a guitar that's not a Gibson or a Fender, simply because of resale value, because I had one once. It was a local builder down here. I think his name was Jim LeClaire. Nice telly, but man, it took forever to sell it, and it was really a difficult experience. But I think what you just said, I think if it plays good, you're right. You know, yeah. I think that's an over.
Well, if it's really the right guitar for you, then there's less chance you're going to want to resell it.
Right.
Unless you need some money.
Yes. Yeah. Very, very true. What? I'm sure you've had literally personally thousands of transactions you've been involved with. Are there like the top 2 or 3 favorites you've had, either because the people who bought it, the situation, or the profit margin even? I mean, do you have like some favorite transactions that you've been involved with?
Well, we've had some. The deals I like is where somebody ends up really happy, and so a lot of those are beginning kids whose faces just light up when they play a guitar for the first time, where their parents are finally stepping up and getting them a decent guitar. And on the other end, it's nice when a buyer gets a guitar he likes. But really, the things I think that a couple of deals that have made us feel really good is where the money that we paid people to acquire the guitar or to sell it for them has changed their life. We had the very first Sunburst Les Paul.
Wow.
And it was a guy who his father had bought it for him when he was, 10 or maybe 12 years old in Memphis. And he played it through high school, put it under the bed. And when he pulled it out again, it's, this is going to be his retirement, the retirement fund for him and his wife. So they were just tickled, obviously, at the amount of money we were able to get for them. And can you share
Can you share how much money you did get for that guitar?
Well, I can. I can tell you the price tag on it was $625,000.
Holy smoke! And this was a guitar presumably from like the late '50s.
Yeah, it was from '58.
Wow.
From the end of May in '58, and it's in the ledger books at Gibson. So when I saw the serial number, I knew I knew what guitar it was, because I'd seen the entry in the ledger books and thought the guitar was lost. So there was no doubt about what it was, and I knew from having gone through the ledger books when I was at Gibson that there wasn't an earlier one with the cherry sunburst finish like as we know it now. There were earlier ones that had some version of cherry, but this was the first of the bursts.
That's amazing.
And we had almost a similar thing with a banjo that had been in a family. It was the first 5-string Granado with the bluegrass setup, one-piece flange and flathead tone ring, that's the type of banjo Earl Scruggs had, and so that's the holy grail for bluegrass players. And it was the batch was documented as the first one, and this was number 1 in that batch.
Wow.
And the grandfather of these two women had gotten it originally because his mother had a boarding house and somebody had paid off some rent with this banjo. And then he had played it, passed it on to his son. And then when that guy died, the daughters split up his possessions. And one of them, there were two big ticket items left. One was a grandfather clock. One was this banjo. And one of them took the grandfather clock thinking she got the better part of the bargain. And so they brought us the banjo, and they had taken it, or people had heard about it where they were from in northern Alabama, and had offered them like a few $1,000s for it, just a pittance, or it had been too busy to go look at it, and we were able to offer them $100,000 for it, and they got the vapors. I didn't think women did that anymore, but it really was a life-changing thing for them.
That's awesome.
So those are the kind of things that are memorable, I think, and stand out and make us feel good about being in the business.
Is on the flip side, is there like a worst transaction you ever had? You don't have to reveal the names or anything, but is there like some nightmare where like the standard of nightmare transactions that everybody in the shop knows about?
No, we haven't had a real disaster of a transaction. We make mistakes. There's a guitar sitting here on the wall that I probably bought and didn't notice a crack in the headstock, and sometimes a refinished guitar will slip by. But we haven't really had anything that's just been an all-out disaster.
That's great. What would you say in your shop? What are consistently? What do you feel are the sweeter sounding guitars that you consistently see coming through?
Well, it's everybody has different tastes. The Martin and Gibson flat tops, the older they are, the better. They're pretty consistently great. And for electrics, it's really the old standbys, the 50s and 60s, early 60s Gibsons and Fenders. And then just other things will jump out that you don't expect. And from an individual maker or, sometimes just a new guitar will have a great sound. It's always a surprise.
Is there if you could say, is there a guitar that's clearly overrated, a guitar that consistently comes through where you say, man, I don't know what everybody's talking about, but we keep getting a bunch of returns on this, or this thing is garbage? If you could say, I know.
No, I wouldn't characterize it that way. There's some that in some brands really whose guitars I don't particularly like, or I don't think they stand up to, say, Martin or Gibson, but there are different sounds and different uses for guitars, and a guitar like an old Martin that sounds great acoustically is gonna not be so good in the studio, and maybe not be so good to put a pickup on, or maybe harder to control with a pickup on it. So depending on the use, a guitar that may sound a little flat and dead to me may be perfect for other uses. So, and every guitar has its voice, and I think if you try to play bluegrass on every flat top, you're going to be disappointed with some. But if you try to do some delicate finger picking on a bluegrass guitar, you're probably going to be disappointed too. So,
sure.
I wouldn't downplay any guitar unless it's just an all-out dog, and I don't know that's really consistent for any manufacturer.
How about the other side, underrated? Is there a guitar you consistently see that, every time you see it, it's like a solid instrument, it sounds good, but for whatever reason, it never gets its just desserts, and, it's never ranked as high as it should be?
The ones that, if I had to pick one, I think the Santa Cruz flat tops are pretty consistently good, and I mean, they're not underrated in terms, or underappreciated in terms of price, but I think in terms of quality and recognition, they don't get quite what they're due.
Santa Cruz flat tops.
Yeah.
How about on the electric side?
Gosh, I don't know. We don't deal I think the new guitars that Gibson and Fender are making are great. That's what we see mostly, and most of the other ones we see are we don't see a good cross section. I should say of new electrics.
Sure.
We see a fair number from people who are doing relic versions of classic Fenders.
What do you think of those? What's your opinion of the whole relic guitar? In general.
Well, some of the guys do a better relic job than Fender or Gibson, or arguably at least. And I think the real value of those guitars is if you're playing out and don't want to beat up your if you've got the real thing. If you've got a Blackguard Telly, don't take it out on every gig until you've worn the finish off. Take a relic version out. And assuming and it should sound as good if the maker's good enough to make the neck the way you like it, and pickups are pretty good now. There's a pretty good variety of pickups, so you should be able to match up pretty closely to a vintage sound. But to me that's the value of the relics, not so much. I don't know that they're collectible, or if I would want one just on its own merits, except for that reason.
You mean so the aesthetics about it is not the value. The value is in that you could take it out and nobody's going to know.
Yeah.
It'll play. It'll sound great. Yeah.
Well, that is based on the aesthetics. So I guess it's kind of a contradictory argument. But I don't know why you'd buy one, except to make people think you had the real thing.
Yeah, I'm not they look great, but I'm not the kind of guy to get one of those.
And some of them are pretty cool with their multiple layers of finishes that have been sanded off, and some of them look like have the look of a homemade refinish and then worn off. There can be more variety in those than there is in the real thing. So I think there's a value and an appeal there. I don't mean to downplay them at all.
No, and I don't think you came across that way at all. So no, I think you're very dead on what you said. You've probably had loads of professional players in there. Is there any one or two people that stuck out that when you heard them play, it was like, holy smokes, this is? And then maybe this happens like every day, and you can't say it, but does anyone come to mind that or several people that I can't even pick up a guitar for a week now? Oh,
they're literally dozens and dozens. I mean, we have a pretty good flow because of our location. We're pretty close down, and just by being in Nashville, also there are great players in here literally every day, and some of them people may have heard of, and some of them not. But but we've had everyone from like Pete Townsend and my hero Rod Cooter has been a regular when he's in town. Carlos Santana came in early on, and it's just hard. I mean, if you pick your favorite guitar player, then that's probably somebody who's been in here if they're living and still touring. And we hear so much good stuff, and also from the local guys. And starting the best known in town would be Vince Gill, who's a great player,
sure,
and is in here a lot. But some of the other guys who are session guys or just up and coming, like J.D. Simo and Daniel Donato, a couple of guys that came out of the honky tonk scene here in town, or Johnny Hyland, who was in the day. All three of those guys started at a club in downtown Nashville.
Johnny Hyland's he's a phenomenal. He's an amazing, brilliant player. And you know what? You mentioned Pete Townsend. He's so. I don't know why. He's always kind of like on the list of good guitar players, but man, he's a brilliant, brilliant songwriter, brilliant creative player, man. I mean, he's just, and he's not someone you can pigeonhole. He's not someone that what's going to come out of in any particular song. He's just a brilliant guy. Yeah. Really good.
Well, he came in. It's just kind of a special memory for us. He came in and was looking around, and he picked out he was looking for a mandolin and bought and pulled one off the off the wall and was going to get it, and then wanted to look around some more, and ran into I think a '66 J200, which is like the one that he used on Tommy, and he picks it up off the wall and says, "Oh, this is the Pinball Wizard guitar," and then plays that. Then he plays that lick, and
the opening to Pinball Wizard.
Yeah,
that's really cool.
Yeah, and then he bought the guitar. So it doesn't really get any better than that, I don't think.
That's got to be surreal to some extent. You got Pete Townsend playing the opening to Pinball Wizard, the song he wrote that you probably heard 100 times. That's wild. Yeah. You didn't sell him a Pete Townsend SG?
No, I don't think we had one. I don't know if he would have bought it or not. But I mean, there are guys that just sit around in here and play, and you just drop your jaw. Acoustic guys would be like Brian Sutton, who's just an absolute monster, and has a much wider scope of talent than the bluegrass that he's known for. Or Tommy Emmanuel comes in and just he'll sit down with somebody who's trying out a guitar and pick with them, and just they may or may not know who he is, but it's just that kind of atmosphere.
Is there a guitar you personally consider to be like the holy grail of all guitars? Something that either sonically or aesthetically is just something you'd love to have in your collection. You'd grab it in a heartbeat.
Well, I think the one I'd love to have, fortunately Christie, my wife, has in her collection. It's a 33, I think, 0028, a Martin 0028, and that was about the only year they went to a 12 fret body and then kept the 25.4 inch scale. Oh, wow. So it's basically an OM. Right at the time they quit making OMs, and then the next year they dropped back to the shorter scale. And for my money, this guitar is the most versatile and has the most tonality going for it. So,
and you said it's a 1933.
Yeah.
So that's 16. That's 84 years old.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing. What kind of restoration work has to be done on something like that?
Not a thing to this one.
Oh my! So that's an original guitar.
Yeah.
Wow.
And that would be a desert island guitar for me. Except that it would get, as long as we had some shade on the desert island, as long as we had a palm tree.
Wow.
Other than that, I don't know. There's so many guitars that have their own special appeal, and fortunately you can play one for a while and then play another for a while and then switch around, and they all and sometimes some days the same guitar will sound 10 times better than it did the day before for some reason. So it's always surprising and an adventure to pick up a guitar.
We're going to wrap up soon, but I want to ask you a few personal questions, if that's okay.
Yeah.
What's your biggest business or personal win so far?
Oh, I think it's got to be the store. I mean, overall, the books that I've written, and to a much lesser degree, the music, the songwriting, and I failed to mention I played with the Nashville Mandolin Ensemble for about 15 years.
Oh, that's awesome!
And did a lot of arranging for them. So. But I think just the store, what we've done in 4 years is just I think that's the biggest accomplishment we could have hoped for.
That's great. What you have any hobbies or interests outside of music?
Right now, there's no time. So music is kind of the hobby. If I can do something away, if I have some time, maybe I'll pick up a guitar and play for fun. And then we've worked so hard these last 4 years. We've kind of let our house go to hell in a handbasket. So there's work around the house and the yard to do.
That list is easy to ignore, though.
I don't know if I would call that a hobby.
That's a punishment.
It's maybe the axe hanging over the head.
Yeah. What's the most important lesson your business has taught you? And I don't just mean Carter Vintage store, your business, your business experience. What's the most important lesson it has taught you?
Well, I think it's really corny to go back to just trying to treat people nice, and it goes back to the golden rule, but it just seems to have worked for us. If you're nice to people, word gets around, and it may not have any bearing on the specific interaction that you're involved in. I mean, if you're dealing with a jerk, the guy may still end up being a jerk and not doing business and not responding to being treated well. But overall, it seems like it pays off several times over. So
be nice. That's a great.
Yeah.
And you know what? Well, I don't think that's corny at all, because you know what? For me, as I've gotten older, and I don't know how old you are, but we're probably not too far apart. It's also the least amount of stress on yourself, and that becomes much more important. The value of having less stress, especially if you could avoid it, to me is a very important thing.
Right.
And being nice is like a real easy way to not have stress, even when you are dealing with a jerk or whatever. It's just like so much easier to take a deep breath, smile, and just walk away, or whatever the deal is.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's corny at all. One more question. What's next? You're not a guy that, you're on the almost 5-year point here. I'm looking at your past history. Went through. You're at that.
Yeah, I know. 5 years is about it for me.
Yeah, man. I mean, what's next, man? What can we expect next besides your novel?
Yeah. I mean, that can be accomplished with a little click of the mouse.
That's right.
Getting the novel out. But as far as future, I'm at retirement age, but I don't see that happening. And I don't see a big change ahead. We're in a boom town in Nashville right now, and we're in an area that is booming also, where a lot of the land around us is being bought up for people building hotels and other business buildings, and I don't know if we'll get caught up in that. And I don't know what we would do, whether we would try to move or, if the money was right, just kind of call it quits or scale back to a smaller operation. Right now, this business is about all we can handle, and we haven't had a vacation yet. I think maybe I should just be short-sighted enough to say our big goal is to have a vacation.
Yeah, man. That's great. Yeah, that would be great. I hear that. When in 5 years is not a lot of. You think it's a lot of time, but when you start a business, it goes by in the blink of an eye.
It has.
Because I've done that several times, and it's like, holy smokes! And it's easy to do things like not take, especially when your wife's involved.
Yeah.
Listen. You're a great guy. I've really wanted to get on the phone with you. You're awesome, and I knew you'd be a great guy because I knew how. Well, no, man. I saw how I'm really keen on how people act, and I knew that the people in the store acted that way because it came down from the top. So it's a real pleasure. I can't thank you enough for your time. Is there anything you'd like to promote? I'll tell everybody right now. Go to Carter Vintage Guitars. It's cartervintage.com online. They've got I'm on your email list. Every week I get an email and I salivate. They've got some great guitars. Anything else you want to promote or upcoming or anything you're involved with?
That pretty much says it all. I would say check the YouTube channel. There's some great videos that friends have just done for us, and some of them are to demonstrate instruments, but most of them are just where we tell people to play what you want to play, and there's some good stuff there. And other than that, we're all about the store here. So there's one thing promotes another.
Awesome. Walter, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate everything. This is great, man, and I'm going to have you on again in a couple of years, because whenever you get that big call to either sell the business or whatever, I want to hear about it, because that'll be a nice problem to hear about how you handle it.
Yeah, looking forward to that.
All right, thank you so much for your time.
All right, thank you.
Take care. So long, everybody. Hey, thanks very much for listening. You can sign up to get notified of future episodes on our website at everyonelovesguitar.com. Now go play your guitar and have fun. Till next time, I'm out. Peace. We hope you enjoyed this show. If you did, subscribe to the Everyone Loves Guitar podcast, and you can do this online at everyonelovesguitar.com or on iTunes. And if you like the show, please leave us a 5-star positive review. The more 5-star reviews we get, the higher our show ranks, and higher rankings mean we get to continue speaking with cool, interesting guests on our show. We'll see you on the next episode, and until then, keep playing your guitar and have fun making music.